Welcome to Trial by Wine. We take a closer look at crimes that highlight how fascinating humans can be. Schmidty, Swanee and Clarkey visit crimes and run them through their jury of three, debating both sides of the case to agree an appropriate, if totally fictitious, sentence. Please be advised, Trial by Wine may include explicit or disturbing content and will include drunken rambling. Listener discretion is advised. All right, how are we?
Not too
Very
bad.
well, very well.
Not shabby.
Yourself?
Oh, I'm amazing.
Really?
For our
You
listeners,
are amazing.
I've just spent about 20 minutes complaining about my life, but that's not for you. Don't worry about that. Okay, so what news have you got?
I could tell you a lot about your life.
Just my last 4 days. Hey, have you got any news though? Not about me?
It's 36 degrees at the moment.
Oh,
and
it's
it's
so
that's
past
warm.
6 in the evening.
Yeah.
Oh,
Is
no,
it warm for
it's
you too,
38.
Schmidty?
Yeah,
Oh, gosh,
yeah.
you both got it.
On top of everything I just discussed, we've had a heat wave, so it's been even better.
Oh,
Yeah. We're having a heat wave.
We've had it for about a week, and we've got a
Same.
week and a half to go of it.
Yeah,
So
39
gosh.
tomorrow.
we just don't get the reprieve that you guys get.
In fairness, I did spend the last 2 days on the boat, which was
very
a
nice.
good
that's
hour, and I needed that.
nice.
This reminded me of my childhood. So when you're up at the lake, and for our listeners who are not in Australia, the houseboat that I talk about is on a massive lake, probably not as big as the lakes in the Midwest of the USA or whatever, but big enough, about 6 times the size of Sydney Harbour, apparently. And
Oh my God, that's huge.
it is huge.
I don't know what I was thinking.
takes-
Some diddly little bath. I don't know. Is that funny? That's much bigger than I thought it would be.
Some of my friends, and Clarkey, I can't remember if you were in the car at the time, took a wrong turn when they were meant to come up, and it took them 5 hours to drive around it. So that might give you an
Oh,
indication
wow.
of how big it is.
It's
Yeah.
huge.
That was us.
Yeah, it was. I wasn't sure if you were with Karen and others.
Don't know what you're
So-
talking about.
Yeah, I will be there for 6, and by the time they arrive, it was like 11:30 because they'd gone up the wrong way and they'd had to circumnavigate the entire lake. So it's a big way.
God.
Because it's so big, it's quite cold generally. But this reminded me of my childhood because it was so hot at 38 degrees and we'd had multiple days of this sort of heat that when you jumped in the water, it actually was for most of your body's length warm. And then you'd hit the cold bits. So you had to really dive down to get cold.
Dive down to get
This
it,
is
yeah.
what it was like when I was a kid. Like you'd be swimming and you couldn't get cold. You couldn't get
Mhm.
cool. So I suppose we should introduce ourselves. I'm Schmidty.
I'm Swanee.
And I'm Clarkey, and together we are.
Trial
by
by
wine.
And on that topic, what are we drinking? Swanee's got a...
Oh, look at that!
Coles
It's the budget
home
bottle.
brand. Coles home brand soda water.
Cost of living crisis.
Absolutely. Look at that. That's quite nice. Sparkling mixer. Hmm.
Oh, look at
Oh,
that.
and what are you mixing it with? Crime.
Saliva. Saliva. No, nothing. I'm going to guzzle it straight from the bottle. Class act.
Nice.
Ooh.
We're having a Pinot Grigio, an alcohol-free one. It's had the alcohol gently removed.
Oh, good one.
Glad it wasn't aggressively done.
It's called Tread Softly Everything Except, which I assume implies it's got everything except alcohol.
Have you had it before?
Tread
Not
softly.
this one. No, I mean it's okay. I struggle to
It's an
find.
alcohol removed wine.
Yeah, but it's
okay.
also not super sweet.
That's good
so much
though.
of what you
That's
drink
good.
is just sickly sweet. So these are okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was on a 0, if you recall, the last time we recorded, and I didn't mind it. I didn't finish the bottle because,
Why would
what's the
you?
point? Yeah. And at the end, I sort of thought it was okay, but it was very grapey, I found. But,
Yeah,
it's okay. Well, I'm on pirate juice, and that's simply because it's all I had to hand at the time that I thought I'd better get it organised. And I have a bottle of soda water. So we're going to do 2 recordings today. So for our listeners, I've elected to go first with my story so that I don't get too drunk to be able to read later.
As if that would happen.
It's been known to happen. So I have a story for you.
Do tell.
As I've sort of alluded to, I've had a relatively difficult week or so, and I was a bit drained. I was drained on the weekend, and it got to, shall we do a recording? Yeah, we better. I better come up with a story. And I thought, what is it that I've banged on about a few times, but we've never actually covered? So,
That's a long list.
yep.
I'm in the dark. I don't know where you're going to go with this. I'm excited.
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, well, I can. In previous episodes, I have mentioned my dislike of glorifying a certain Australian bushranger and his mates.
Oh, you have.
Ah.
And you're going
I
to glorify
have.
him?
No, I'm not.
Oh.
Well, actually, in fairness, I thought, I've just got the top line headlines about this guy, and I've made my own mind up about it, and I don't really know any of the details. So perhaps I should do him justice.
I think I've forgotten. I suspect I did it at school, but I have not retained.
I didn't.
I definitely.
And I sort of thought, well, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm always happy to be proved wrong. So I figured, why not delve into the story and see whether there's more to it, and perhaps there's a whole bunch of mitigating circumstances that I didn't understand. So my sources straight up are Wikipedia, a website called kellygang.asn.au, the Australian Dictionary of Biography, and the Maitland Mercury and Hunter River General Advertiser, New South Wales.
Schmidty, if I had have known you were going to do this story, I would have suggested you come up to Glenrowan to the Ned Kelly Museum.
Oh, but I've been at Mansfield recently, and that's in it too.
It's
He's
possibly
everywhere, this guy.
No,
I thought it was a real Victorian
Glenrowan.
thing.
It
I
is.
know
Yeah.
Glenrowan's got the hilarious
Animatronics. Like the dog. There is a dog pissing at the bar in the museum.
They were cutting edge.
I saw it.
Well, it is now, but when I was
40
thinking
years
about
ago.
this, I was 40 years ago when I saw it as a primary school kid.
Yeah.
It was actually pretty good when you think about it, because they
Yeah.
project the faces of characters and then they have the sound. Well, this is how
Yeah.
I remember it.
Mhm.
So, Swanee, for your for your benefit, Glenrowan has a museum of the Kelly Gang, because that is where
Yeah.
their last stand takes
Yes,
place.
right. Yeah.
And someone has done this. Well, I mean, it's a bit of a piss weak world now, but as I
Yeah.
said, 40 years ago, it was pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And you go in there and they've got sort of like, I'm not sure if I'm right about this, guys, but almost mannequins or animatronic type creatures that move a little bit. But then they project faces onto them, and then over the loudspeakers comes the speech from each of them, which is quite disconcerting, because suddenly someone's face is lighting up and they're a character and they're talking. This is my very, very vague memory of it. But I will pay tribute to the Glenrowan Museum for Ned Kelly, because it was cutting edge 40-something years ago. Just going to say that. Maybe could do with an update. And you're right, Clarky, next time I head up to your way, which, by the way, Barno Arthur gets a mention and so does Chiltern.
Ooh.
But, so very close to your home ground right now. Next time I'm heading up to Kelly country, as we like to call it, I might swing into Glenrowan and have a little look-see and see if it is what I remembered.
How far away is it from you guys?
Glenrowan.
Yeah.
Maybe
50 minutes, an hour.
About an hour, I would say, yeah.
And that's obviously on the Victorian side.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'd recommend, if you are planning on doing that, make sure you're running late so you don't have time. It is a shit experience nowadays.
If the Glenrowan Museum would like to sponsor us,
it's going to be a hard sell.
Yeah.
contact us at trialbywine@gmail.com. Oh, goodness. Anyway, so the irony of all of this is I thought it would be a pretty simple thing to write this up. But it turns out there's a lot of naughty behaviour going on amongst a whole lot of people. So I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible. Otherwise, we'll be here for a long time. And I'm not guaranteeing that we're going to be here for a short time either. But hopefully we'll be here for a good time. True.
I'm sure our international listeners will be riveted, given that they've got probably no idea about who you're about to talk about.
Certainly, if you're listening to us in the US, you may think about this in the context of Billy the Kid. This is our version of the Wild West.
Yeah.
So John Red Kelly was born in Clonbrogan, County Tipperary, Ireland in 1820. At the age of 21, he was transported to Van Diemen's Land, which is now called Tasmania, for stealing 2 pigs. He did 6 years in a penal colony. Probably, yep. I don't even know if it was at the same time or one after the other.
Strong
Details
bloke.
He was a strong bloke. Maybe they were little piglets. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, he nicked a couple of pigs, and he went to a penal colony for 6 years, which was possibly Port Arthur. Not 100% sure on that. And he was released in 1848, where he went to Port Phillip District, which is now called Victoria, which is the state that Clarky, Woo and I live in. And he got a job as a carpenter with a farmer called James Quinn at Wallen, which is now Just Wallen, a bit like Just Ken. Red married James, sorry. What am I saying? Sorry. I've got an apostrophe there that I didn't pay attention to.
Well, that's pretty.
Red married
A same-sex
James's.
marriage. I was going to say that in those days, I wasn't aware of that part of the story. But,
Wow.
now you've got me.
I've started well. Sorry.
I was going to say we're telling a totally different story. He was like at the forefront.
A lesser-known story.
Yeah.
No, sorry. Red married James's 18-year-old daughter, Ellen, who was also born in Ireland, and they did some mining. So after they got married, they went and did some mining as the gold rush was a thing at the time, and they raised enough money to buy a freehold in Beveridge.
Which is, again, where? Just
Victoria.
Victoria.
Beveridge is about an hour-ish from where I am now. It's actually becoming it's an area in, I think, the Hume, I'm pretty sure it's in Hume, which is the same shire that I'm in. And it is projected to go from 4,000 people living there to something like 80,000 people in the next 5 years. It's seeing phenomenal growth, predominantly driven by housing, and it's above Donnybrook. So from Donnybrook to Beveridge,
we've got a Donnybrook here too.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
Anyway, that whole kind of area is set to grow exponentially in the next 5 to 10 years. So they buy this bit of land and they have 8 children.
Busy.
In pretty quick succession, I think.
In how long? Yeah, right.
Not long. And
did their population grow from 2 to 10 in the same period that Beveridge is going to go from 4,000 to 80,000?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But into the water in Beveridge.
They should have tried harder.
Well,
Beveridge
the thing
got
was,
them nailed.
Irish Catholic for a start. There's no TV, and I think some of their children may have died. Certainly, the first one died within 6 months of its birth. So, at the time, you had a lot of infant mortality. People pushed out as many kids as they could, in the hopes that some would survive. And it reminds me of that painting, and I can never remember who it's by. But that painting, it's a famous one where it's a 3-panel series, and it starts with
McCubbin.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's the people who come over as settlers, pioneers, immigrants, basically, Swanee. And in the first one, they're young and whatever, and I think they have a baby. In the second one, they're standing over the grave of the baby, and there's a house in the background. So it shows the progression of the pioneers.
Oh, okay, I do know that.
And then the third one, I think it's an ancestor looking at their graves on the land that they settled from memory.
Okay.
It's absolutely beautiful. It tells a marvelous story. Fantastic piece of art. McCubbin, thank you.
Wow.
But this whole period is that, right?
Right, yeah.
So you've got to go right back to no infrastructure. It's our Wild West, effectively.
The bush, what we call the bush.
It's
out
the
bush.
Yeah. So the thing about it at the time is that there was a bit of a push in the mid to 18 push in the bush. The government was trying to create this idea of selections.
Get 8 kids to do that. That's how you get 8 kids.
It is how you get 8
Not
kids.
again.
Anyway, I'm not talking about procreation now. I'm talking about land management.
Okay.
And so the government had said, what we'll do is we'll create small agricultural plots, and we'll let people buy them or lease them. It's a bit complicated, but you could buy half of it, and then you had to pay a certain amount, and then you had to pay it back over a certain lease period. But you ended up being a landholder, a freeholder eventually. They were called selections, and the idea of them was, what had happened was, before that, you had all these people came in and said, squatters' rights, I'm taking over a bazillion hectares, and that's mine. And the squatters were running sheep and cattle, and they were big stations, if you like, and they were very wealthy. And so then the government says, well, we don't have enough land being utilised for agriculture. So what we'll do is we'll break this up, and we'll give people with less money, or people who haven't got in there first, this opportunity to have land. And it did remind me of, I don't know if any of you have seen the magnificent, I think it's Ron Howard film, Far and Away, with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, where they, at the end of it, they do the California or Oklahoma or someplace like that. They do a land grab. And they literally do these races where they go bang, and then you run out and you put your flag in a plot, and that's yours, and you get to work it. Let's never mind the Indigenous people who lived there in the first place. Whatevs, right? And if our listeners don't understand my tone, that was massive sarcasm. So they were selectors. They were people who came from a pretty poor background, and so they bought into this idea of getting a bit of land and trying to work it and trying to do well for themselves. The other thing about squatters is that squatters kind of took the land without a lot of illegally, effectively. And so there was a bit of a tension because they were a bit more nefarious, I guess, or less legal in the ways that they managed that land. And by the time that these selectors were coming along, the squatters were very wealthy and quite powerful in the community. The other thing as a cultural context that I want to give you is that the Kelly family, so Red Kelly and Ellen, were Irish immigrants, and they brought with them, and it's an interesting thing because I've read recently a lot of people talk about, we don't mind people coming to this country, our country, and I'm using inverted commas for our listeners. I'm doing lots of rabbit ears.
Rabbit ears.
But as long as they don't bring the trauma of their own place with them. Well, I can tell you that at this point in time, everyone brought the trauma from the context of their previous country with them. So the Irish had a bit of a dislike for the British. The English had run rampant, frankly, over the Irish for a lot of time. The monarchy, Australia at this time was not federated, so we were 6 or 7 colonies, British colonies. We were at this federation happened in 1901. That's when we became officially Australia. So at this point in time, there's no love for the old country. There's no love for the old rule. I think there's a perception that, I'm out in this wild country. And in fairness, my father in 1956 had exactly the same attitude as coming here as a migrant, going, look at this wild place. I can have a great old time here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Imagine it when there really is no rule, right? So there's a lot going on, and a lot of people are bringing their own trauma from their own experience, which, by the way, is pretty fair. Red Kelly stole 2 pigs and got transported to a foreign country that had no infrastructure and nothing. And other people also, as we know, a lot of our...
And then served 6 years.
in hard labour, managed to survive it, and then tried to build a life for himself. So, yes, there was a lot of awful stories. And if you ever go to Port Arthur, which is just steeped in tragedy one way or the other, there's a lot of stories about the history of people who came over, and some of it was like loaf of bread, candlestick, the kind of crimes that people were transported for were just such petty theft or petty crimes, and yet the punishment certainly didn't fit the crime. Let's put it that way.
They weren't really immigrants either, were they? They were being sent here against their will.
They were being thrown out because there was no space for them in England. They had all those hulk ships in the Thames, and they were overrun by people who were doing these dumb small crimes because or they were being hung, right? So you could have done something pretty minor and still got hung. And it was all effectively driven by the Industrial Revolution, so as far as I understand it. So people who used to have good country lives in agriculture were being forced off the land because there was not as much work for them. They'd go to the cities, crime spiked. And they found their way to Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada. England basically was like, we're going to take our problem kids and put them somewhere else. So as I said, Red and Ellen popped out 8 kids. Their third child, who happened to be their firstborn son, was named Edward, and he came to be known as Ned. Now, the landed beverage that they had, thanks to their gold mining money, was shit, frankly, for farming. And Red found it all a bit much, so he decided to self-prescribe with alcohol. And in 1864, the whole family then moved to Avenel, near Seymour, which again, Swanee is moving up closer to Ilden. So this is all the height. This is moving from Beveridge up the Hume, effectively. If you follow the Hume Freeway, this whole kind of thing is up the Hume Freeway, which used to be called Sydney Road because it was the road to Sydney, effectively. And so this is all a corridor pretty much up the Hume. Yep. So we go up there. They go near to Avenel, and it didn't take long before the local police were aware of the family. Ned went to school, but I doubt he got more than a primary school education, if not less. The only really notable thing to happen in Ned's first 11 years was that he saved a kid from drowning in a creek and was given a green sash by the family, of which he was quite proud.
Sorry, Schmidty, how old was he then?
11 at this point.
So how old was he when he was in prison?
Let's put it this way. He dies at 25.
Red was in prison earlier.
Okay.
So Red went to prison. Red's the dad, not Ned.
Oh, thank you, darling. That's where I'm getting confused because I think at what point does his name change from Red to Ned? Right. Okay.
No. Red's the dad.
So it's his father who's been...
I'm assuming he had red hair. I have no idea why he's called Red because his name's John. So let's assume he's got red hair.
Surely they would have called him Blue.
I don't know why they didn't call him Bluey. I know, right?
Blue, I know, right?
I know. which is so Australian. But anyway, so speaking of Red going to jail, Red then got banged up again in 1865 for receiving a stolen hide. And he actually got banged up because he couldn't pay the £25 fine. £25 was actually a shit ton of money at the time, so it's not surprising. So he had to do another 6 months hard labour. By December 1866, Red, not Ned, was again in the police records for being drunk and disorderly. And rather tragically, Red died on the 27th of December that year, most likely from alcoholism or just having a pretty shit life. And he was 46.
Probably not a bad innings for that time.
Oh, depending on where you sit in the socioeconomic pool, yeah, it wasn't too bad, I guess. Now, Ned is just 12 years at the time of Red's death, and he's now the new man of the household. You know, he's the one bloke. And at 12, and he had to actually go and sign the death certificate for his father. So after that, the family moved to Greta, which was nearer to Ellen's family, the Quinns, and another load of relatives by marriage, the Lloyds. And there's quite
I find we call it Greta.
Is it? I don't know why you call it Greta, but sure.
Very close to Wangaratta.
Wang.
Okay. Fuck me. After that, the family moved to Greta, spelt Greta, which was nearer to Ellen's family, the Quinns, and another load of relatives by marriage, the Lloyds. There seemed to be quite a lot happening for a lot of the family, not just the Kellys. Red's brother, who it seemed was also a drunk, set fire to the house where the family and some of the Lloyds were staying. Allegedly, he was pretty pissed at the time. He was sentenced to death, which I thought was a bit harsh, as I don't think anyone actually died in the fire. But then again, Red got 6 years hard labour in Tasmania for stealing 2 pigs. So maybe when we think we're sentencing too harshly as a jury, we can recall the historical context of the 1870s British rule. Luckily for Jim, who was Red's brother, his sentence was commuted to just 15 years hard labour. Phew!
That's a relief.
Isn't it just? The Kellys then leased a small farm of 99 acres at 11 Mile Creek near Greta. Again, this farm was pretty rubbish for farming, so this selector thing is not going so well. And Ellen then decided to rent out some of the rooms on the farm for travellers to make some money for accommodation, and she sold grog on the sly. And I read some statistic, and I'm probably going to be wrong, but it was something like the amount of land that had been given to selectors in this period, the selection land, if you like, was something crazy, like 15 million acres. And by 5 or 10 years later, only 360,000 acres were actually producing agriculture, like wheat. So I'm going to have to suggest that this scheme didn't really work.
No.
Ned, unfortunately, after the death of his father and the move to Greta, fell pretty quickly into a life of crime. He met a fellow called Harry Power, who had escaped from Pentridge prison and was, to all intents and purposes, a bushranger.
Is Pentridge a Melbourne prison?
It was, yes. It's no longer.
Yeah.
It's now some lovely apartments, I believe.
Is it really?
Yes, it's been kind
Inside the old wall.
yeah.
Oh,
it's been done
gosh.
up, yeah. It was kind of, I think, what Prisoner was based on.
I'm wondering, is there another more famous prison in Melbourne, or is that the one?
The old Melbourne jail?
The one.
Oh, maybe I've been to something as a
tourist.
Tourist, yeah,
Probably
like
the old
when I was
Melbourne
about
jail,
10 years old or something.
fair.
Yeah.
Which also features in this story.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so yes.
Yes, that's probably where I think
Yeah, Pentridge is somewhere near,
Coburg.
yeah, I was going to say Northcote, but you're right, Coburg. And it was still operational in our youth.
Okay.
And it had,
Yeah, I
it's
certainly
got
remember it.
massive old bluestone walls around it. Of course, with razor wire and shit on it. So it was bang in the middle of town, effectively, this big prison. Okay, so Harry Power was a bad un, and many believe that Ned was his protege. In May 1869, Harry Power, Ned, and some others in Power's gang tried to steal some horses from John Rowe, a squatter in Mansfield, which they wanted to use to then rob the Woods Point Mansfield Gold Escort. However, John Rowe was having none of it, and he shot at them, so they ran off. And Ned left Power and his gang for a bit. The heat was a bit much, I think. Then, in 1869, Ned, who was 15 at the time, robbed a Chinese hawker named Fook. Fook said that Ned robbed him of 10 shillings.
Is that what he said after he robbed him? What was his name before he got robbed?
I knew you'd go there. Ah Fook, there was like Ah Do and like a whole lot of those Chinese names. Poor old Ah Fook. Ah Fook has a sad end story, but anyway. Ah Fook said that Ned robbed him of 10 shillings, but when Ned was arrested, his story was that Ah Fook had abused him and his sister, Annie, over some fight about water. So I think the story goes, Ah Fook comes up and goes, I'll give you a bit of money. I want some good drinking water, but they robbed him because he got creek water instead. But according to him, Ned just brandished a stick at him and said, I'm a bushranger and give me all your money anyway. So it was a bit of a carry
Very
on.
confusing, isn't it?
That's this whole story, FYI. But because a whole bunch of witnesses who happened to all be Ned's family said that Ned hadn't done anything wrong, the charges were dropped. Arfook,
I mean,
I
that makes sense,
believe,
doesn't it?
went on to possibly take his own life at some point. Anyway.
Oh.
How do you know about our Fook?
Because the kellygang.ans.au website has a plethora of resources
all the
about
connections.
all the connections. It's the most
Yeah.
spectacular piece of work. So kudos to whoever did that.
If you'd
I'm
like to
trying to think of
sponsor us.
You can contact us at troublewine@gmail.com.
Yeah.
It's a wiki. It's a wiki entirely of Ned Kelly and everything.
What's it
around
called when you have your major sponsor? There's another name for it as well, like your banner sponsor. So,
Platinum sponsor?
no, it's not quite a thing of
No.
There's something else, but it's sort of like, like in football, it's the ones who are on the front of their jersey. There's another name for it, which is a fairly recent term. I don't know. I'll ask the kids; they'll know what it is.
Flagship, maybe?
Yeah, it's something like that. It's not flagship, but the kids will know. They were talking about it
Tier 1.
in relation to soccer,
Mm.
in relation to Premier League football.
Mhm.
But that's I'm not sure there are many. I don't know that we might have to go sort of. They've probably got some other big something banner.
Okay,
it is.
seriously, we'll take whatever we can get.
Yeah.
If kellygang.ans.au want to sponsor
I
us,
love it.
let us know.
If you're thinking of going into sponsor.
Yeah, so anyway, in 1870, Ned took up with Harry Power again. From March that year, they went on to do a few armed robberies, and Ned was named as his accomplice. So police arrested him, and he ended up in Beechworth Jail, again near you boys. No one could identify him, though, and whilst the police wanted him tried, the case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. Some say that the Kellys, the wider family, intimidated witnesses, as no one could positively identify Ned. Power's accomplice had been described as, and this is a quote directly, this is not my words, half-caste, but the police thought it was just that Ned was a feral, unwashed kind of guy. Either way, it was dropped. So we all clear on what I just said?
I think so, but who had said it and why?
So a witness described him as half-caste,
Yes.
i.e. he was half
But he
native.
wasn't. Yeah.
No,
But he was
but the
just-
police said, no, it is him, even though you've said it's someone who's half-caste.
Oh.
It is him because
Oh.
he's feral and he's dirty, and so he
So that's
just
actually
looks dark.
So it's a bit of a stretch all the same.
That'll
right?
do.
And kind of racist too. But
Well, that
it's
goes
the
without
time.
saying.
It's the time.
I was going to say, I'm not, I'm not
Yeah.
saying
There's
it's
a lot
the
of-
right.
Not racist for 1869.
No.
Oh, actually,
God, no.
quite temperate for 1869.
Absolutely.
Yep. Oh, my Lord.
Positively
Anyway.
highbrow.
Oh.
That's right.
So, if you have a look at the aforementioned Kelly Gang website, there's an insane timeline of all the charges against various Quinns and Kellys and Lloyds and everyone who were up there. So they were all very busy, but they were just not busy farming. Power was arrested later and always thought that Ned had informed on him.
Oh, that's not good.
Turns out it was someone else in the family, some uncle or something, but Power always accused Ned of being a traitor, and there is some suggestion that Ned actually may have provided some information to get himself off some charges himself.
Oh.
Still, Ned wasn't done
Sounds
yet.
like Nicola Gobbo.
It's funny you should say that because there are a lot of underbelly kind of parallels. As I've said before, I get really irritated by people making Ned Kelly out to be some kind of swashbuckling hero. And the more you read about the story, the more involved you get in it, the more you start to think he's no better than Carl Williams. Anyway, we'll get on to it. Ned, and again, I think he's like 16 or something at this time, wasn't done yet. And in a ludicrous turn of events, he ends up getting arrested. Some other guy named Jeremiah McCormick accused Ben Gould of stealing his horses. Ben was a mate of the Kelly family, so he decided to send a rude note to Jeremiah McCormick's wife and a packet of calves' testicles as a 1870s fuck you.
Delicious.
Which he got
Do
Ned.
they come in a packet?
He put them in a little packet and he got Ned to deliver it, right? Or help deliver it. Jeremiah, none too happy about the slight that the calves' balls and rude note, were to his wife, went and confronted Ned. So Ned punched him, and then he got arrested for assault and the rude note and the balls. And he
And
was
the balls. What's the charge?
It was something like being rude.
Ballsing around.
Ballsing around, yeah. He was sent for the first time at this point to Beechworth Jail to do hard labour for 5 months.
How old was he at this point, Dave?
I think he was 15 or 16.
15 or 16, yeah.
And he got out on the 27th of March, 1871 and went home to greet her. Then, in a series of very unfortunate events, Ned found a horse, apparently, which some guy named Isaiah Wild Wright had borrowed, and then he'd lost it.
Oh. I thought the horse's name was that, and I was like, what?
No,
then I realized, sorry, okay, got it. The person.
This guy Isaiah Wild, inverted commas, Wright, borrowed this horse and then strangely lost it. And then strangely Ned found it, but then he took it to Wangaratta. And boys, can you tell us how far on horseback Wangaratta would be from around the Beechworth Greeter area?
From the last time you did it?
As it is
In case.
10 Greater from Wangaratta.
Oh, that's not too far, actually.
Maybe wouldn't be 20,
But
would
from
it?
Beechworth, didn't you say?
It's further from Beechworth.
No, he was in Beechworth Jail. He went back to Greeter, and now he's taking a horse from Greeter to Wang.
Greeter to Wang's not
10K.
10K. So that's about 4 or 5 hours, I estimate, horseback.
But I
with
probably
no roads.
maybe I should Google
with no
it,
roads
just
and not
might
doing
be-
100 k's an hour.
Greater Road wasn't around then.
The bypass.
So he finds his horse, right, and he goes to Wang, and he hangs out there for 4 days. No apparent reason. On his way back to Greta, he gets pulled up by a constable, Edward Hall, who tries to arrest him on the suspicion that the horse was stolen. Kelly and Hall get into a punch-up.
It's 21 Ks. 21.4
Okay, in that case, that's a good 12-hour ride. So it's a fair distance to take the horse to Wang.
How fast does this horse go? Is it a 2-legged horse?
No, there are no roads, right? They're just going through high country. Well, there are some roads, but they're not great cut roads. Well, he's not riding it hard. He's probably, ambling along.
It's a seahorse, isn't it?
Anywho, Edward Hall goes, "You've stolen that horse." And he goes, "No, I haven't." And there's a bit of a punch-up. And then Ned gets subdued with a bunch of onlookers. And then Constable Hall beats the shit out of him with his pistol. And Ned's head was described as a mass of raw and bleeding flesh.
Oh.
He was arrested and charged with horse stealing, but the charge was downgraded to feloniously receiving a horse.
Oh.
Sounds a bit rude.
Have you ever feloniously received something before, let alone received?
I saw that in the Amsterdam Sex Museum.
I know. Someone has feloniously received a horse. I know, right? And I think someone must have realised that good old Wild Wright had actually stolen the horse. So Ned got a 3-year sentence for feloniously receiving a horse.
Ooh.
And Wild Wright, who I think actually did steal the horse, got 18 months for his part, but I'm not really sure. Also, he resisted arrest and got a punch-up, so that's probably added to his time.
Yeah. Head butted a gun too many times.
So, again, he does time at Beechworth Jail, and then he goes to Pentridge, and then he spends time on a prison hulk off Williamstown, which sounds absolutely awful. So if you're unaware of prison hulks, they were ships that had been decommissioned because they were not saleable anymore, and they were kind of rotting, and they just put all these prisoners on them and just left them there to rot with the hulks. So he gets out of jail early, though, for good behaviour, of course, because there were no horses to steal.
Incredible Hulks?
No, they were not. Of course, he's, a pattern that we like to discuss in the judiciary system that we talk about all the time. He gets good behaviour because there were no horses to steal on the prison hulk at Williamstown, I'm pretty sure. And for a few years after he gets released, he sort of behaves himself. He does some legit work at sawmills, and he wanders around New South Wales living as what he described as a rambling gambler. Now, Ellen, his mother, then marries some American guy at this time whose name is George King. And George and Ned, so it comes back to Greta, George and Ned set up an organised horse theft operation, which, according to Ned, over its time in operation, stole 280 horses. So he gets 3 years hard labour for stealing, possibly, feloniously receiving a horse. If they stole 280 horses and got caught for it, it would have been probably, I'm going to have to say, a death penalty, right?
3 times 280 years.
So, or sent off to Port Arthur with the hope that they would not come out. So some of the members of the King group were also in the Greeter mob, who are another gang that liked to set themselves apart from your average criminal by wearing what they described as flash attire. But to me, they looked a bit daft. The Greeter mob are also called a bush larrikin gang, which I find interesting as it certainly has connotations of being a sort of less dangerous or less serious kind of gang.
Is it like Peaky Blinders?
Well, I'm not sure. They had their hats, right? And instead of wearing the chin strap under their chins, they wore it under their noses. This is why I say they look pretty stupid.
That's the larrikin.
That's the larrikin. You're like, oh, look at us, aren't we larrikins? I'm like, freaking idiots.
No, you're just idiots. Yeah.
Oh, fuck, get rid of that fucking mullet and pull your pants
Put your hat on
up
properly.
and put your hat up properly. I mean, it's a bit like that. Other Greeter mob members were Dan Kelly, so Ned's brother, Jack and Tom Lloyd, Joe Byrne, Steve Hart, and Aaron Sherritt. And they were all local boys. And they all grew up together, and some of them were related, like the Kellys and the Lloyds were actually related through marriage. In September 1877, Ned was arrested in Benalla for riding over a footpath whilst drunk. And, of course, he's riding a horse.
Rightly so, too.
Yes. There was a kerfuffle the next day with 4 policemen who were taking him to court. One of the constables was Alexander Fitzpatrick, who was a friend of the Kellys at the time. I think he'd grown up also with Ned and his family. In the fracas, Constable Thomas Lonergan grabbed Ned by the balls, which did not go down well with him. It did not go down well with him at all. George King and Ned had sold 6 horses they'd nicked from some guy called James Whitty to a bloke named William Baumgarten of Barnawartha.
Hey.
There we go.
That's at the end of
Baumgarten,
our street, Schmidty. I mean,
Swanee, yes.
What is it? Sorry, where?
Barnawartha.
It's up the end of our road.
Oh, is it that close? Is it?
Well, it's a couple of
Yeah,
Ks.
We call it Barnawartha.
Wow.
I don't care. It's Barnawartha. I'm sick of listening to you and your silly pronunciations.
What do you call it?
Barnawartha.
Barnawartha.
Apparently it means parting of the clouds.
So remember Ellen married this American bloke called George King who was running this big horse stealing organization. Around the same time as Ned and Dan got arrested, he disappears and I have no idea what happens to him. Whether he books it back to America or he's knocked off, no idea. Someone could tell us. So up until now, we've got horse stealing, some punch ups, some drunken behaviour.
Feloniously receiving
A horse. Yeah, you know, shits and giggles.
or riding across a footpath.
A bit of shits
Some
and
very
giggles.
serious crimes there.
Well, in our context, we would not see them as serious, but at the time, they were probably mid-range. You know, like maybe what the police would have considered them at the time were gateway crimes.
We should bring back the riding across the footpath for the e-scooters.
Yeah, absolutely. And how long did you have to go to jail
6
for that one?
months hard labour.
Imagine. Oh God.
At this point, shit gets real.
Uh-oh.
So, because of these warrants,
He's had enough.
No, not him. The police have had enough. Because these warrants for this new horse theft are out, the police have gone, right, we've got to get this Ned and this Dan, you know, they're naughty boys, we've got to pick them up. Constable Fitzpatrick, who I spoke about earlier, who was a mate of the Kellys, went to their home, because he knew them, to arrest Dan. Dan wasn't there, apparently, so he hung around and he chatted with Mrs. Kelly, Ellen. Dan and Bill Skillion, another relative by marriage, show up later that night and Fitzpatrick says, you're under arrest, mate. And Dan says, yeah, all right, but can I have some dinner first? I'm guessing it's a long ride back to Beechworth, wherever they have to go. So Fitzy goes, yeah, okay, and he stands guard over him. Now, this account is all according to Fitzy. So apparently, then Ned rushes in and tries to shoots at him with a revolver. Ellen, Mrs. Kelly, then whacks him over the head with a fire shovel. Another fracas ensues, and Ned fires at Fitzy again, wounding him on his left forearm. They kept saying above his wrist, but I'm going to say that's probably your forearm, right? So then Bill Skillion and Bricky Williamson, whoever the fuck he is.
Oh, Bricky, he's new.
Good old Bricky Williamson rushes in with guns and they disarm Fitzy. Then Ned says, oh, shit, sorry, mate. I thought you were someone else. And then another constable come to arrest someone because, you know, like that's what we're expecting. Shit, mate, I thought you were someone else. So then Fitzy goes, oh, and faints. And then when he wakes up, Ned makes him cut the bullet from his own wrist. And then Ellen, Mrs. Kelly, dresses the wound. And then they bribe Fitzy to keep this all to himself. And then they let him leave. But on the road, as he's riding out, 2 horsemen are behind him in hot pursuit. So he hightails it out of there and he gets to a hotel where he had his wound treated again. And then he rides to Benalla to report what happened.
To sing
Why
like
did
a
he have to
canary.
take the bullet out himself?
It's very interesting in our modern context that you think that, because I was thinking about this later and I was like, well, because Ned's account, that's according to Fitzy. According to Ned wasn't even there, right?
Right, okay.
But Ned's sister Kate, so there's lots of different accounts. Ned's sister Kate said that Fitzy had hit on her and then Ned came in and did shoot him.
Yep.
But later in 1880, Ned says, that's bullshit. That never happened. 3 policemen at the time swore that Ned confessed to shooting Fitzy, but Ned's like, bullshit. Now, Bricky Williamson,
Who has guns and not bricks. I'm disappointed
in
with that. I want him
1881,
running in.
I know, right? I don't even know who. I can't remember who he is. I think he's by marriage. He's another connection, right? So this is 1878. So 3 years later, Bricky Williamson, who, by the way, is trying to dodge a charge for himself for something else or related to this. In fact, he's trying to dodge a charge entirely related to this incident, says that Ned had shot Fitzy after Fitzy pulled his gun. So he's saying Ned shot him in self-defense. But then Jim Kelly, who was, I think, the drunk who burned everything down and got 15 years hard labour, and Tom Lloyd, I don't know why he was there, said Fitzy was pissed when he showed up and he pulled Kate onto his knee, and so Dan threw him to the floor, and then Ned barges in and there's a struggle, and then Fitzy hurt himself on the door, and this is the point, Swanee, hurts himself on a hook on the door, and there's no gunshot wound at all. And that, to me, is slightly interesting, even though no one paid attention to it, because why did he take any kind of bullet out, right, himself?
Yeah.
Apart from at the time, it's like, take the bit of shot out because you might get an infection. Who knows? I mean, how's that for 15 different accounts of what could have happened?
It sounds like no one knows.
I know,
They're
and
just
certainly
making it
not
up on the
me.
fly.
It just sound like ferals. It sounds like I don't know. It just all sounded out of control.
What does
And I'd
the
like
Ned
you to-
Kelly ANS website say about this? They should be more specific with their
That's
research.
where I get a lot of the information, although I have rewritten it to suit my tone of voice and how I'm reading this story, right? But to your point, Swanee, they are a bunch of ferals. I think they're a bunch of ferals, and this is why I get really irritated when people glorify the goddamn
gross.
Kellys. So, regardless of what happened, the police arrested Bricky Williamson, who I don't know was there, Bill Skillion, who apparently may not have been there, and Ellen Kelly for aiding, as in Mrs. Kelly, for aiding and abetting attempted murder. And they all went down for it. Bricky and Bill got 6 years and Ellen got 3 years hard labour. And I think she was possibly pregnant at the time, which is pretty impressive because at this point, her third eldest son is nearly 20, I think.
God.
So she's knocking him out, or at least she had a newborn, which I assume was to George King, but I'm not sure because somewhere along the line she also had a child by some other guy who was just living there. And it was quoted, he said, yeah, we had a nice time. And then I moved on, and then she sued him for maintenance for the kid. So this also didn't go down with Ned, in as much as that his sainted mother, who was with child, or at least had an infant child, not sure which, at the time was arrested. So Ned and Dan, however, hightail it into the bush when this has happened. So some of the people in that room get arrested. Ned's not there at the time. He's already pissed off. And they meet up with Joe Byrne and Steve Hart, other members of the Greeter gang. And they hit out for a bit, sluicing gold and making whiskey. But eventually someone tips the police office to where they are. And on the 25th of October, 1878, 2 police teams were sent to get them. And I'm not sure about this because I read that, but the one we're going to talk about is this team that was Sergeant Michael Kennedy and Constables Michael Scanlon, Thomas Lonergan of ball grabbing fame, and Thomas McIntyre. And they all camped overnight at Stringy Bark Creek. Toolloombullup? Is that all right? Is that okay? Or is it Toolloombulloop? Toolloombullup. What is it? Anyway, Toolloombullup, which is about 36 kilometres up the road from Mansfield. Oh, no, I'm getting it wrong. It's Tumballup. Fucking hell. They camped overnight at Stringy Bark Creek, Tumballup, which is 36 k's up the road from Mansfield. So now what they didn't know was that the Greeter mob weren't far off from them at all. So the police are camping at Stringy Bark Creek, no idea that the Greeter mob are somewhere near them. They're about 2.5 k's away. And Ned picked up the police's tracks. And I think this is significant. So the next day, Ned, who at that point, knowing that there were warrants out for him and Dan, and that there'd been this fracas about possibly shooting Fitzy and whatever the shit happened there, could have just packed his guys up and run away. They're in the bush. They're 2.5 Ks. Like, that's a significant distance, really, when you think about it in terms of Highland bush. They could have gone the opposite direction. But no, let's just go to the police camp instead. So Kennedy and Scanlon were out looking for the gang, so they're not there at the time. McIntyre and ball grabber Lonergan were at the camp. And Ned comes along, and Thomas McIntyre is the first that he comes across, and he's unarmed. So he surrenders pretty much immediately to Ned because he's got no choice. Lonergan, who, let's face it, Ned is very unhappy with because Ned felt that the ball grabbing incident, was like to kill him. He was very unhappy about it. And it was a bit unmanly as far as he was concerned. It wasn't playing fair. It clearly had done a good crushing job because Ned was very angry about the ball grabbing incident. So Lonergan goes for his gun and runs to some logs and jumps behind the logs for cover. But Ned, again, not being a fan of him, shoots and kills him.
Oh.
In the balls?
No, I'm not sure. Just in whatever shot he could get. Remember, also, this is 1870, right? Like, we're not talking about really accurate firearms. It's impressive at times that they can shoot and kill anyone. Anyway, Ned said later that he did not begrudge his death, saying he was the meanest man that I had any account against. He described the ball grabbing, as I said, like to kill him. So I would say that Lonergan had left an exceedingly lasting impression on Ned. I also saw a photo of Mr. Lonergan, and he did look a bit mean, I've got to say. So McIntyre was left with the gang. So just this one guy. His other constable's been shot in front of him. He's got, I think there's 4 of them, and the rest of the gang and Ned. And he says, now hang on, guys. The other 2 policemen that are coming up here, now they're Irish Catholics. Don't be bringing all your political shit. Be nice to them, okay? They're like you. So you don't want to kill them, Ned, because he doesn't want his colleagues to get killed. Around 5:30 p.m., the other 2 ride up, and McIntyre says, hey, surrender, just put your guns up, surrender, because Ned told him to do so, and he won't kill us if you put your guns down. Instead, unfortunately, Kennedy goes for his gun, and there's a bit of a shootout. Scanlon managed to get off the horse, and at the same time, he was trying to get his rifle up, and Ned shot him. And then Kennedy got off his horse and tried to surrender. So he'd shot Kennedy in the armpit, and then Kennedy actually tried to turn around and surrender, and he actually dropped his gun. But Ned Kelly didn't realise that, so he just shot him in the chest and killed him. But he himself said, I didn't realise that he was actually trying to surrender. So,
oh, okay.
Oh, well, in that case, it doesn't count.
Yeah, oh,
Our mistake.
never mind.
At the same time as all this is happening, our mate Thomas McIntyre, the most sensible of all of them, who's like, I surrender immediately. I have no guns. Leave me alone. He gets Kennedy's horse and he books it out of there and races off to Mansfield, which he reached the next day. So remember I said where we were, Stringybark Creek was 36 kilometres from Mansfield. And that's why I was saying that the horse ride for 20-something Ks must be relatively slow, because this guy is racing to Mansfield to talk about his 3 colleagues who've just been shot dead, and it takes him to the next day to get there, and this altercation happened at 5:30. So it's the next morning
Probably
he
had a
arrived.
sleep.
Well, I'm sure, and the horse would have had to have some rest. Same with the other journey, Wangaratta Greeter. And aren't we lucky that we have the Hume Freeway now, is all I have to say.
Right.
Is it not even the Hume Highway?
No, well, it's the
And
Hume
cars.
Highway now. Yes, you're right. There's the Hume Freeway, or is boys? It's the Hume
There's the
Highway.
Crazy
No.
Burn. Hume Freeway is the bit from the the ring road to Crazy Burn.
And then it turns to the Hume Highway. Yeah,
Hume Highway is what I know, yeah.
The Hume Highway
If we
goes
drove to Melbourne,
Road,
we'd be on the
funnily
Hume
enough.
Highway.
which
Hume
all
Highway.
used to be
Yeah.
Sydney Road. Yeah. Okay, so the police at Mansfield then send a search party up and they find Lonergan and Scanlon, and then 2 days later they find Kennedy's body. According to Ned, the cops were going to kill him, so he was acting in self-defense. But Thomas McIntyre said, hey, mate, we were just there to arrest you. We weren't heavily armed.
Yeah.
We were just sent up to pick you up, you and Dan, right? And so, mate, whatever. Now, I guess both things could be true, because there was a fair amount, according to Ned, there was a lot of scuttlebutt and grapevine that said the police have said that they're going to kill you. And there's a quote in one of his letters that Lonergan had basically, are you two familiar with the way that Banjo Patterson writes his poetry? Ned Kelly, and I get onto this, he drafted a couple of very long letters. One's called the Cameron letter and one's called the Jerilderie letter. I'm doing really well on Australian place names. And if you read it, it's a bit of there's not a lot of grammar and not bad in the way of spelling, but grammar's a problem. And if you read it with a slight Irish accent in your mind, it makes a little bit more sense. And I'll talk about it in a bit, but he talks about Lonergan had said something along the lines of, or the way Ned puts it, he says, he was blowing that if ever there was a guy that he was going to kill, I was going to be the first guy that he was going to kill. Like, it's written in this kind of almost amusing fashion, but it's not funny. Like, he's trying to justify his actions in these letters. He says something like, in this, it shows my feelings towards him, as he said, we were good friends. And even this is about Fitzgerald, I think. But then he says, he was the biggest enemy I had in the country, with the exception of Lonergan. Like, he just, every opportunity he gets, he throws Lonergan in. He's an asshole. I hate that guy too. And Lonergan was going around telling people that if anyone was going to shoot Ned, it'd be him. And that's why Ned was, in his mind, and his defense is, I had to go and kill these guys because it was shoot first and ask questions later because they were going to kill me, right? So that's Ned's defense,
Fair.
which is documented in these crazy letters. Well, I'm not sure it is fair because, as I said, you could have chosen to run away. You could have left. Yes, you would have still been on the run, but you could have got away.
Also, if someone's threatening to kill you, maybe you'd want to go and get them first.
I agree. So that's why I'm saying both things could be true. The police could have set out saying we weren't going to kill him, we were just going to arrest him and his mate because they were just stealing horses at this point. They hadn't killed anyone. There may have been an altercation with Fitzy where they may have shot him. We're not really sure. But from his perspective, the police were out to kill him. Okay, so now they're cop killers.
True that.
Yeah, and the government announced a reward for their arrest. And then they passed, not long after, a Felons Apprehension Act, which came into effect on the 1st of November 1878. The gang were given until the 12th of November to surrender. But as they didn't do that, by the 15th of November, they were officially outlawed. By being officially outlawed by the government, it meant that anyone could kill them. Anyone.
Oh.
Without any consequence. I saw Ned Kelly, so I shot him dead. And by the way, there was a reward going at this time too. So I think we're getting real Wild Westy here. And anyone helping them...
That's going to make it easier to catch someone, doesn't it?
Well, that's the idea. The idea is
yeah.
to try and catch them. But also, the consequence of this law was that anyone who was helping them and sympathising with them in any way faced up to 15 years hard labour themselves. So the gang at this point, they take off up to the Murray, and they are intending at this point to cross the border into New South Wales, but the Murray at the time was flooded. So they couldn't...
Raging.
It was raging, so they couldn't get there. So they turned back and they headed back into Victoria. Needing cash, they hatched a plan to rob the Bank of Euroa. Joe Byrne did a recce on the town, and then the gang held up the Young Husband Station, which was just out of town. 14 people were held hostage, and some of them were likely sympathisers of the Kelly gang anyway, and they knew about the raid in advance. They then went out to cut some telegraph wires to, cut communications effectively, and picked up some new hostages who were a hunting party who happened to be out at the time, and some railway workers who they added to the pile of hostages they had at the homestead. Joe Byrne stayed behind with the hostages while Ned and Dan and another went to Euroa. I think it was Steve Hart. They held up the National Bank of Australasia, making off with cash and gold, and again took more, and it was something like £2,500 worth of cash and gold, which was a considerable stash. And again, they took more hostages back to the station. So now they've got 37 hostages, which apparently they entertained by doing some trick riding for them, which made me think of Hollywood on the Gold Coast and, those sorts of things. And then they left them, I think, with Joe again, telling them, oh no, they all left, and they said, stay here for the next 3 hours, otherwise you will suffer the consequences. So while they were at the homestead, Joe Byrne wrote out 2 copies of a letter that Ned had dictated to him, which were posted to a man called Donald Cameron, who was a Victorian parliamentarian, and they also sent a copy to Superintendent John Sadlier. And interestingly, at the time, because of some comments that Donald Cameron had made in Parliament, Ned foolishly and incorrectly thought he was a sympathiser. This is one of the letters which is referred to as the Cameron letter. The letter describes what happened with Fitzy and the Stringybark Creek murders, saying that the police were corrupt and that they'd harassed his family, and basically he acted in self-defense and it was the system that was to blame. In a classic move, though, of we can't catch you, so we're going to hurt everyone close to you, the police went about arresting all the suspected sympathisers of the gang. So it reminded me now of the Scottish Assizes when the English went and basically broke up all of the clans in Scotland after the Culloden War. It's got that same kind of feel about it with, just people coming in and going, right, you're a sympathiser. It's a witch hunt, or what was the McCarthy witch hunt, the communist hunt kind of thing. But it's all about the Kelly gang. So over 30 people at this time were arrested, and some were released within a couple of weeks, but 9 had to hang out forever waiting to find out if they were going to do hard labour or be released. And it was obviously a tactic to draw the gang out, but it didn't seem to work. Needing money again, though, the gang goes to Jerilderie, where they end up robbing a bank. Now, this bit is, I guess, where in the kind of lore of Kelly gang, this idea of him being an anti-establishment Robin Hood kind of guy comes into the story a bit, plays in a bit. So while they rob the bank, which is all very coordinated, I could go into it for hours, but we've already over an hour in this story, so I won't. They had a bunch of help from sympathisers. Ned burned the mortgages and the securities in the bank, cursing the banks for smashing the poor working man, or words to that effect, right? So at this point, he starts to... It's not just stealing money to fund the gang themselves. Prior to this, they certainly weren't giving all of their money to the poor or whatever. But what he's doing here now is just like, okay, to get more sympathy, I believe, especially from the locals who we're currently robbing, we'll write off their mortgages. So he destroys all the paperwork, basically. He also, at this time, is noted to taking everyone to the pub and shouting them. So we all go to the pub, hey, come on, everyone, yeah. And they have a few
And you
drinks.
wonder why he's a hero.
Yeah. There's your answer.
One of his guys had nicked a watch off someone, and he's like, nah, give it back, whatever. And then the local priest or someone convinces him to give back a horse that they were going to steal. It was a racehorse that some young lady owned. So that's his great magnanimous moment where he's like, okay, well, we won't take that horse and you can have your watch back and we'll write off some of the mortgages because, who cares? We're here. And he also spent a goodly amount of time lecturing everyone around the corruption of the police and probably other shit about monarchy and very much that Irish political anti-monarchist blah, 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 which is fine. I'm not arguing. I think you've got a fair position if you've been in the oppressed party. But he's taking his time at this point to use his platform. And then the gang pisses off with the horses and weapons and their cash and their gold from the bank. Now, before this raid, he writes another ridiculously long letter. I believe it's 56 pages long. And this is called the Jerilderie letter. And he's talking about how his life got like this because of the oppression of the police. And he talks about the history of Irish rebellion against the English. And he also basically makes threats to the establishment, and he raves on and on. So we've gone from being a robber and whatever to starting to consider himself as a bit of a man of the people and a voice of the oppressed. You know what I mean? Like, I think he's got a certain celebrity at this point as well, and he's starting to get there. You know what I mean? He gave the letter, the Jerilderie letter, to a bank accountant with the intention of having it published. But the authorities actually suppressed it, and they only published bits and pieces. The letter eventually was rediscovered and published in full in 1930, which didn't really help him much. According to historian Alex McDermott, Kelly inserts himself into history on his own terms, with his own voice. We hear the living speaker in a way that no other document in our history achieves. I don't know, mate. Have you read any of A.B. Patterson's works? It's very similar. It has been interpreted as a proto-Republican manifesto. One eyewitness to the Jerilderie raid noted that the letter suggested Kelly would have liked to have been at the head of 100 followers or so to upset the existing government. It has also been described as a murderous, maniacal rant and a remarkable insight into Kelly's grandiosity. Noted for its unorthodox grammar, the letter reaches delirious poetics, Kelly's language being hyperbolic, elusive, hallucinatory, full of striking metaphors and images. His invective and sense of humour are also present. In one well-known passage, he calls the Victorian police a parcel of big, ugly, fat-necked, wombat-headed, big-bellied, magpie-legged, narrow-hipped, splaw-footed sons of Irish bailiffs or English landlords.
Whew, that's a lot. I'm not sure which insult he's trying to get across.
Yeah. It's diluted by the fact there's so many, I think.
And the letter closes, I know, neglect this, and abide by the consequences, which shall be worse than the rust in the wheat of Victoria or the druff of a dry season to the grasshoppers in New South Wales. I do not wish to give the order full force without giving timely warning, but I am a widow's son outlawed, and my orders must be obeyed.
Jeepers.
So up until now, there'd been a reward for Ned and his gang. It started about £800 and then it goes up to £1,000 or whatever. But after Jerilderie, everyone's like, fuck this shit. And the New South Wales government and the banks cracked the shits and they raised that to £4,000. The Victorian government also matches it. So now the reward's £8,000. And I don't know because I'm not doing a time money converter, but I'm going to hazard a guess that we're talking millions, the equivalent of millions. I mean, even in the 60s, my parents bought our house, which is now worth lots, for something like £28,000, right? So this, go back 100 and something years earlier, this is shit tons, right? And
All I'm thinking is how typical. New South Wales get the banks to help them raise the reward, and Victoria gets the taxpayers to do it wholly and solely. Bad financial management even back then.
Nothing's changed. Right. I'm sorry, that made me laugh when I spilled a bit of drink on my white pants, which is very upsetting. Okay, so we got this massive, biggest reward ever for bushrangers at the time. The police organised for 6 native police from Queensland to come down to Victoria to help track the gang.
It's a long way to go.
Yeah, and there was this beautiful article, which I, again, didn't want to read out to you, but it's so racist and so lovely at the same time. And it's about these 6 poor trackers who came down from, and these guys had been co-opted into the Queensland Police Force from like age of 12. It's so patronising and condescending about these guys. Oh, they were lovely and they were very well received and they didn't upset anyone. And there were no complaints to be had about the native trackers.
Yeah, they'd love to leave their family and friends to go down to
died.
Victoria to hunt criminals. Like, of course they would have. Like, how
died
ridiculous.
of TB or something. I think he's buried in Victoria or something. And they were like, oh, and they travelled down from Queensland by boat and they were terribly seasick. Well, of course they bloody were. And then they travelled down here. And I think one of the police bosses at the time were like, oh, they're going to be useless here. And in fairness, it's not the terrain that they track in, right? So I'm not really sure that the trackers were that helpful. But I've got a little side note about them at the end. So I wanted to keep them in the story. But this is how serious it is, right? Now we're bringing Aboriginal trackers from New South Wales for our listeners who are not from Australia. The expression native police force in that period of time, some of our Indigenous people were co-opted into basically policing under British rule, which included murdering their own people and everyone. It was horrendous. There's a couple of really good books on this. They're very disturbing.
If it takes 12 hours to go 20 kilometres,
I know. How long
how
by
many
ship?
hours does it take to come down from
I
Queensland?
know, right? That's how bad this was. The gang actually disappeared for about 17 months. So there's this period of time where they lay really low. I think it was after Jerilderie. And the government's getting all this heat because and the police are because they haven't caught them. And so that's when they start to kind of bring in people like the trackers, etc. So by May 1879, the Victorian Land Board blacklisted 86 alleged Kelly sympathisers from buying land in northeastern Victoria. This is very like all the behaviour that happened in Scotland and in Ireland, in point of fact, by the British to try and break the back of people who are showing any sign of rebellion or standing up against government. But all it did was piss the people off, right? And it made them more inclined to help the gang.
Hard to believe.
I know. So there's a lot of pressure on the police, as I said, from the media and from Parliament about what the hell are you guys doing? You haven't caught these larrikins. And then there was a bit of shuffle in the top brass, and I couldn't be bothered getting into it. But, one super senior person gets sacked and someone else comes in and blah, blah, blah. And that some of the police, as I said, they weren't really keen on the native trackers, the Indigenous guys coming in. And then they were like, oh, okay, fine, let them have a go. They took a lot of funding away as well because they're like, you're not getting anywhere. And they deployed all these additional police officers from Melbourne up into the countryside to try and catch these fellas. And this is going on for 17 months or something. So they can't really afford it. And they also had troops. They had army troops trying to find these guys as well. So it's like it's full on. Anyway, then Assistant Commissioner Charles Hope Nicholson,
who had been the leader of operations at Benalla. Now, he tried to be he was relying on an informant network, right? So he was all about spies and shit. He gets replaced by June 1880 by Superintendent Francis Augustus Hare. In June 1880, a police informant, Daniel Kennedy, no relation to the man who got shot, I don't think, or maybe there was, I mean, they were all probably related, said the gang were going to do another raid and had made bulletproof armour out of agricultural equipment. But Hare says, oh, that's a load of old bullshit, and sacks Kennedy, who, as we now know, finds himself on the right side of history.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
It was bang on.
He was bang on. So earlier in the story, there's this guy, Aaron Sherritt. I mentioned him once. He was part of the Greta gang, or Greta mob, right? Aaron had been a really good friend of Joe Byrne, having known him his whole life. I don't know what the relationship between Aaron and Joe was.
What makes them such great friends? What was it?
I can't speak to what the relationship was, but Joe was very important to Aaron. Oh. And I'm not going to cast any nasturtiums on that or aspersions, but somewhere along the line, Aaron becomes a police informant. And it's believed he cut a deal with the police to inform on the Kelly gang in order to protect Joe Byrne from repercussions.
Oh.
That's why I say I'm not clear on the nature of their relationship. As things with Ned and his guys escalated, the police were monitoring various known locations, including Joe Byrne's mum's house near Beechworth. Aaron Sherritt happened to live next door. And so the police, him being an informant, used his house as a base, and there were some caves around there as well that they were using to keep an eye on Mrs. Byrne's house. Now, Joe's mum, Mrs. Byrne, had actually seen Aaron with the police in 1879, and she had just basically told everyone he was a turncoat. So Joe and Ned, wanting to test it, because they like Joe had been his bestie. I'm not casting aspersions anyway. Joe and he had a close relationship, so I'm guessing that Joe didn't want to immediately accept that he had betrayed him in any way. It's very Jesus and the apostles like at this point, right? So they keep sending
I feel
notes.
like we're going somewhere else with it, but anyway.
No, they keep sending notes to Aaron to say, come to Jerilderie, join the gang.
Aaron, come to Jerilderie.
Come with us, mate. Exactly. And he didn't.
What you doing? Come on, Aaron.
Come on, Aaron. We know you're
the name Aaron. I don't know. Feels like foreign in the other names. It feels like Aaron's a bit exotic, nearly.
Might be biblical. Not sure.
Yeah, maybe. Aaron.
Anyway, Aaron did not join the gang. He stayed dobbing on them with the police.
Yeah.
And so they decided the best thing they could do was kill him. Oh. This was intended to be the starting of a most frankly insane plot, which apparently they boasted would astonish not only the Australian colonies but the whole world. And I suppose if it did work out, it would have. Dan and Joe went to Aaron's place on the 26th of June, 1880. And at the house was Aaron, 4 policemen, Aaron's pregnant wife Ellen, no relation to Mrs. Kelly, and her mum. Dan and Joe then kidnap a local gardener and they make him, come on, and they got him at gunpoint and they make him knock on the door to call out to Aaron. So Aaron comes out not knowing the dead.
Aaron!
Yeah, Aaron, come here, Aaron.
A lot of people are calling out for Aaron's attention, aren't
Come
they?
out or the gardener gets it.
No, it was just, Aaron, it's what I didn't write his name down. Whatever my name is, the gardener. Can you come out and look at the geraniums? Anyway, so Aaron comes to the door and they shoot him in the throat and the chest with a shotgun.
Oh, that's not nice.
No, they're not
That'll
pleasant.
do it.
So that's our 4th murder from the gang. The police, I love it, hide in a bedroom. The 4 policemen like, shit, they're here. They hide in a bedroom. And Joe's like, come out. And they're like, no, we're not. And so they send Ellen, the pregnant wife, in to get him. But instead of them that convincing, I don't know why they thought this would work, but instead of convincing the police to come out because Ellen's gone in, they just hold her in there with them. And I'm guessing that the whole thing is that if you don't come out, we'll shoot, and then we'll shoot this pregnant woman, and you're bad people for letting that happen. Police like, fuck that, mate. We're staying in this room. So Dan and Joe then go, right, fine. And they go and get kindling, and they're like, we're going to we'll burn your house down, right? If you don't come out. And I think they might have shot a few times into the house, whatever. In the end, they just give up and they leave. Aaron Sherritt's murder, however, was to be the first domino to fall in a grand plan that, when you think about it, is a bit like that old game Mousetrap. It is that loose. Do you remember Mousetrap?
Yes.
Yeah. And, if you had something slightly misaligned, it didn't work?
Yeah. I bought it for the kids, and it was just a nightmare to actually
is this
have the
plan.
patience to set it up. Yep.
That's this plan. Ned and his gang think that this is what's going to happen. The police are going to hightail it to Beechworth to report Aaron's murder. Then they will telegraph Melbourne, and a police special train will be sent up from Melbourne collecting more coppers in Benalla on their way to Glenrowan, because they've worked out the stops, right? There at Glenrowan, they're going to derail the train and they're going to kill everyone on board. All the police. Then they're going to go to Benalla, which now has no police because they've killed them all. And they're going to rob the banks, bomb the police barracks, torch the courthouse, free all the prisoners, and just go nuts, and then run off into the bush. That's the fucking plan.
I mean, it sounds like a great plan.
And it's crazy. Basically, they said about doing it. While Joe and Dan were knocking Aaron off, Ned and Steve Hart were forcing railway guys to damage the track at Glenrowan, and they selected this special spot where there was a sharp...
They still haven't repaired it, just an FYI.
Well, because it's a tourist attraction. So they smashed this bit that's a sharp curve at an incline, and they think the train's going to be going at 60 miles per hour, and it's just the best place for it to derail and go off into a deep gully. So it's all going to great. And they said at the time, they're quoted as saying they're going to send the train and its occupants to hell.
Oh.
Oh.
So they take over the railway station and the local inn, which is across the road.
Glenrowan's not that bad.
They take over the railway station and they take the local inn, which is across from the railway station, which, by the way, is not the only inn in very tiny Glenrowan at this point in time. And they hold all the men that they pick up at the hotel, and any of the women and the children were taken to the station master's house because, we have to separate these people, to be held as hostages. At McDonald's Railway Hotel, another hotel, which is across town, they had their horses and a keg of blasting powder and fuses, as well as their trusty bullet-repelling armour that the superintendent Hart thought was a load of old bullshit. However, whilst they had a plan, as we know, not all things go to plan, and they don't all turn out the way you expect. So the cops over at Aaron's didn't run straight to report the death. They hung around for ages because they were shitting bricks that
Going to get them.
The other guys were still outside.
Yeah.
Joe and Dan were still outside. They just hung for yonks. Back in Glenrowan, 62 hostages now were all gathered in the Glenrowan Inn. And as the train hadn't shown up, they were having a bit of a party. This goes to your point, Clarky, earlier about the Glenrowan Museum with the dog pissing and everyone's on the piss in it, aren't they, really? Apart from till you get to the final shootout. And they were drinking, they were singing, they were dancing, they were playing games.
They're Irish.
They had nothing better to do. They're waiting for the big shit to happen. So what are we going to do? We'll kill some time. And in some ways, the defeat of the Kelly gang, spoiler alert, has a lot to do with how impaired they were by alcohol because of this. Oh. A lot of people at the time said Ned was really quite nice to them, pretty decent, although he did terrorise one poor guy by threatening to shoot him. Eventually, Ned goes, oh, for God's sake, this will take forever. So he lets 21 hostages go. And he miscalculated a bit, though, because he trusted the local schoolmaster, whose name was Thomas Curnow, who was like, oh, yeah, I'm on your side. Don't worry about it, mate. What do you need? So Thomas Curnow helps him to capture the only constable in the whole of Glenrowan at the time, some poor guy called Hugh Bracken. So they get Thomas Curnow and they capture Hugh Bracken and they lock him up. But Thomas Curnow, he's a turncoat. He's trying to get on Ned's good side. So all the while, he's plotting to bring him down. So eventually at 9 p.m. on the 27th of June, a police special train did finally leave from Melbourne to go to Beechworth. And I'm telling you, it's not a short journey. But I'm going to quote this whole next bit from Wikipedia because it explains it the best. In addition to its crew and 4 journalists, the train carried Sub-Inspector O'Connell, his native police unit, wife and sister-in-law. Why would you take your wife and sister-in-law to this? Anywho.
Because it's a long journey.
Do you want to come out for a day? We're
on a holiday.
Popping up to Glenrowan. Probably all going to get killed, but do you want to come? How ridiculous. So they stopped at Benalla at 1:30 a.m. to take on Superintendent Hare and 8 troopers, raising the passenger count to 27.
I don't think the train goes that fast nowadays.
Oh, no.
I was going to say...
Well, it's a special police train, so I'm guessing they've cleared everything. Now, this is where Hare, who may not have believed in the agricultural, armour, but he did do something smart here. He orders a pilot engine to travel ahead of them as a lookout.
Oh.
So an hour later, the pilot approached Glenrowan, an hour later, as the pilot approached Glenrowan, our mate Thomas Curnow, the schoolmaster who's a turncoat, signals it down to stop, and he tells the driver that there's an intention to derail and murder everyone on board of the train coming behind them. So, of course, he's able to warn the other occupants so they don't get derailed. Ned had decided to free the hostages and was delivering them a final lecture on the police when the train pulled into Glenrowan. The outlaws donned their armour and prepared for a confrontation, and the outlaws donned their armour. The only person you ever hear about wearing this friggin' armour is Ned Kelly. Right?
Yeah, they all did that.
So they all put their 40-something kilo armour on, FYI. It ain't Kevlar. They put all this on. It's plough shields or something. Meanwhile, Bracken, the one constable this is so bad. Like, they must be so pissed at this point because the one guy who's locked up manages to escape to the railway station to explain the whole situation to the police. After which, Hare leads his troops towards the hotel. And this is after 3 a.m., so we're wee hours of the night. So the outlaws line up in the shadow of the hotel's porch, and when the police arrive at about 30 metres away in the moonlight, they open fire. About 150 shots were exchanged in the first volley. Someone shouted that the women and children were in the hotel, prompting a ceasefire. Hare was shot through the left wrist and, fainting from blood loss, returned to Benalla for treatment. Superintendent, the boss. Oh, I have to go. I've been shot in the arm. Fair enough. He could have bled to death, right? If it hit
that's fair.
So Ned was wounded in the left hand, the left arm, and the right foot. Byrne was shot in the calf, Joe. 2 hostages were fatally wounded by police fire into the weatherboard building. 13-year-old John Jones, who died from I believe, a shot to the abdomen, bled to death later. And railway worker Martin Cherry, otherwise known as Old Man Cherry. They were just minding their own business, stuck in the crossfire. A third hostage, George Metcalf, was also fatally wounded either by police fire or shot accidentally by Ned. During the lull in gunfire, a number of hostages, mostly women and children, escaped the hotel. Ned, bleeding heavily, retreated about 90 metres into the bush behind the hotel, where police found his skull cap and rifle at around, it says 3:30 a.m., but that can't be right because that's when they showed up according to this account. So after that. So Kelly's lying in the bush. So let's say 4 a.m. because it's taken probably half an hour to get there, start shooting everyone. This is where we are. Police surrounded the hotel throughout the night and the firing continued intermittently. At about 5:30 a.m., Joe Byrne was shot fatally while drinking whiskey in the bar, and apparently his last words were a toast to the gang. And he probably bled to death because he had a very high blood alcohol content, which would have made him bleed faster.
Blood thin.
Yeah, thinned his blood. At any rate, over the next 2 hours, that and the fact he's riddled with bullets probably, I don't know. He's definitely got one in the leg already. After the next 2 hours...
Definitely a combo of both.
Yeah. Police reinforcements under Sergeant Steele and Superintendent Sadlier arrived from Wangaratta and Benalla, bringing the police contingent to about 40. 40 against the Kelly gang, which is, I think, is 5 guys. Seriously wounded, Ned Kelly lays in the bush for most of the night. At dawn, about 7 a.m., clad in armour and armed with 3 handguns, he rose out of the bush and attacked the police from their rear. Police returned fire as Ned moved from tree to tree towards the hotel, at times staggering from his injuries and under the weight of his armour, 41 kilos, and the impact of bullets on the plate iron, which he later described as like blows from a man's fist. Sorry about that. Due to these factors, Kelly had difficulty aiming, firing, and reloading his guns. Oh, poor Ned. Eyewitnesses, struggling to identify the figure moving in the dim, misty light and astonished as it withstood the bullets, variously called it a ghost, a bunyip, and the devil, which was written...
A gun-wielding bunyip?
Yeah, written, that's a quote from journalist Tom Carrington wrote, "With the steam rising from the ground, it looked for all the world like the ghost of Hamlet's father with no head, only a very long, thick neck. It was the most extraordinary sight I ever saw or read of in my life. I felt fairly spellbound with wonder and I could not stir or speak." The gun battle with Kelly lasted around 15 minutes, with Dan and Steve providing covering fire from the hotel. It ended when Steele brought down Ned with 2 shotgun blasts to his unprotected legs and thighs. Ned was disarmed and divested of his armour by the police while Dan and Hart continued firing on them. Dan was wounded by return fire and Ned was carried to the railway station where a doctor attended to him. He was later found to have 28 wounds, including serious gunshot wounds to his left elbow and right foot, several flesh wounds caused by gunshots, and cuts and abrasions from bullets striking his armour, which showed a total of 18 bullet marks, including 5 in the helmet. Now, for our international listeners, if you've ever seen Monty Python, the Holy Grail.
It's a flesh wound.
Ned Kelly's armour was not dissimilar in a lot of ways to the armour of that Black Knight who's like, come back here, it's just a flesh wound. I'll bite your legs off. In the meantime, the siege continued. At around 10 a.m, a ceasefire was called and the remaining 30 hostages still in the hotel at that point, were able to leave the hotel.
Were sloshed.
Now, yeah, they were ordered to lie down as police checked for any outlaws among them. 2 of the hostages were arrested for being known Kelly sympathisers. By the afternoon of the 28th of June, some 600 spectators, I can't even believe there were that many, had gathered at Glenrowan, and Dan and Hart had ceased shooting. Forbidding his men from storming the hotel, Sadlier ordered a cannon from Melbourne to blast out the outlaws. Then decided to burn them out instead.
A lot?
At 2:50 p.m, senior
How
constable...
long does it take to get a cannon
How long does it take to get 2 guys to come out of there? Surely they've run out of ammo at this point. They've stopped firing. Anyway, at 2:50 p.m, senior constable Charles Johnson, under cover of police fire, set the hotel alight. Now, I love this bit. Passing through the area, I'm just passing through, Catholic priest Matthew Gibney halted his travels to administer the last rites to Ned, then entered the burning hotel. The police didn't. He entered the burning hotel in an attempt to rescue anyone inside. He found the bodies of Joe Byrne, Dan Kelly, and Steve Hart.
He's the real hero of this story, isn't he?
The causes of Dan and Hart's deaths remain a mystery, although people think they took poison. Police retrieve...
Whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, they could have, right? Whatever.
84,000 whiskies.
They also could have bled to death. I've no idea, right? So police retrieved Joe Byrne's body and they rescued the mortally wounded Martin Cherry, which didn't help out because he died anyway. And
Old man
Cherry, who apparently was in like an outbuilding in the kitchen. After the fire died out at 4 p.m, the police recovered the badly burned bodies of Dan and Steve Hart. Others wounded during the shootout were hostages Michael Ridden and his baby sister Bridget, who was grazed by a bullet, Jimmy, an Aboriginal trooper, Jones's sister Jane received a head wound from a stray bullet and 2 years later died from a lung infection that her mother believed was hastened by the injury. Whew. So after all of this, Ned Kelly gets taken to Benalla and doctors patch him up, say, you might have a bazillion wounds, but none of them are fatal. You'll be fine, mate. Flesh wound, right? He could have skulled. Outside the lockup where Kelly was kept, they brought Joe Byrne's body and they strung it up and they photographed it, which I think is a bit crass. And they took casts of his head and limbs for a wax work.
time.
And that was later exhibited in Melbourne. People who were sympathetic to them asked for the body, but police said no, and they did a quick inquiry and they buried him in an unmarked grave in a Benalla cemetery.
That couldn't have been too hard to find, couldn't it, really, at the time?
No.
Oh, there's a fresh grave there, and there. Well, it's going to be one of us.
Yeah. 1 of 3.
Yeah.
And those 2 have got
1 of 10
markings
even,
on
you
them.
still find it. It's not like that Benalla Cemetery had thousands and thousands of people in it, I'm sure.
True. Dan Kelly and Steve Hart's charred remains were buried by their families in unmarked graves in Greta Cemetery. Ned Kelly got better at the Melbourne jail. There you go, Swanee. Oh, sorry, the Melbourne Jail Hospital. And 4 weeks after his capture, so 4 weeks after sustaining serious wounds to his wrist and his foot and being shot up, it was arranged he got transferred to Beechworth for his committal hearing.
Why would he have gone to Beach?
Because
that's
where it all happened.
Okay,
I don't
so
know.
they go back there, okay.
Yeah, right. Don't ask me.
You're here, you're there. It's a lot of travel in this, actually.
A lot of train
You're
travel.
here, you're there.
It doesn't make a lot of
Had
sense.
to get a cannon up there.
To get around these days. There's people getting around. I'm like, I can't be bothered. Oh, can't we just do it here?
Maybe it was that all the witnesses were up there. So for the trial, we'll call them there because it's easier than them all travelling down to Melbourne.
Yeah.
So whilst Ned was pretty convinced he was going to get a guilty verdict, so he didn't give a shit really, his defence attorney, who was MP David Gaunson, tried to claim that police persecution drove him into bushranging and murder. That may well be the case, but it didn't do much for Ned's case, and he was found guilty of killing Lonergan. For some reason, the prosecution didn't actually bring forward charges around murder for Scanlon or Kennedy, and he was sentenced to death by hanging. Judge Sir Redmond Barry said, "May God have mercy on your soul," which is, by the way, what judges said every single time they gave a execution sentence, to which Ned then replied, "I will go a little further than that and say I will see you there where I go." As it turns out, coincidentally, Judge Barry died 12 days after Ned's execution. Bum, bum, bum. So there was a big fuss about his execution and 32,000 people signed a petition demanding a reprieve. because there was quite a lot of people who had come from the same immigrant background and could sympathise with the position he was in. It's probably the same amount of people going, shut up and do as you're told. And there were a whole bunch of protests and carry on. And it reminded me a lot of like the anti-vaxxing protests, which were really just a way of dressing up white supremacy, same kind of thing. So at any rate, at 10 a.m. on the 11th of November 1880, Edward Kelly was hanged in the Melbourne jail, now known as the Old Melbourne Jail, Swanee. And his last words were, well, I suppose it has come to this, which was later quoted by journalists as such is life.
Oh.
So they weren't his last words?
No, they were later requoted to be such is life. And,
wow.
and that, like a lot of the bullshit around this story, has become the law.
Well, that makes Ben Cousins look like an idiot. He got such his life tattooed on his
He should have done the research, right? Now,
what should it have said?
It's much
well,
longer.
It has come to this.
Well, I suppose it's come to this.
You wouldn't
he
get
did
that
have
tattooed on
apparently
your
an
stomach,
Irish
would you?
accent, FYI, but it wasn't as strong because it was first generation Australian, second generation Irish. But he did have an Irish accent.
Everyone had an accent back then.
To be sure. Now, I don't think Ned Kelly was a Robin Hood figure, but his acts and his death led to a royal commission into the conduct of the Victorian police during the Kelly rampage. This led to findings that there was widespread corruption in the police force and there was quite a bit of a shakedown that took place. The report said that the police had acted fine, actually, over the Kellys' crimes, but in other ways were corrupt as heck. So the way they were managing a whole bunch of other things were actually a significant issue. The reward money, that £8,000, when it was carved up and it went out to a whole bunch of people with Superintendent Hare, famous for saying that agricultural arm is a load of old shit, got £800, which was actually the lion's share of anyone. So 10% he got for it.
Mm.
And, if he actually had listened about that, the fact that this guy had said there's going to be another raid and they're going to use this armour, maybe 3 innocent hostages might not have been killed. But sure, take your 800 squids.
You deserve it.
Yeah. I did want to note this. Those are the Indigenous trackers who came down from Queensland and got that racist, condescending, but of its time, kind of not intending to be any of those things. Compliment, yeah.
Racist, condescending, of its time, compliment.
Let's pat them on the head. Well, aren't they good? It was disgusting, but it was kind of, whatever. Here's a footnote to this story which just says it all. They, for their part in trying to find the Kelly gang, were awarded £50 each, which at the time would have still been a really good amount of money. But the Victorian and the Queensland government decided it was best to keep it, saying it would not be desirable to place any considerable sum of money in the hands of persons unable to use it.
Gosh, you still hear that today, don't you?
And the Kellys thought they were the victims of racism. Tell that to the trackers and fuck. And that, my friends, is the story.
Fuck your trackers.
Fuck your trackers. Fuck your government. Give me my 50 quid. And that, my friends, is the story of Ned Kelly, the anti-establishment hero standing up for the little people, or was he a narcissistic loony who lost all sense of right and wrong? What do you reckon?
Nice one. I enjoyed it. Well done.
Did I give you more information that you perhaps had previously known?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it massive, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, it's probably stuff that I would have done it felt like going back to school in some ways. It felt like something we would have sat through and learnt over a number of weeks.
I don't think they would have told it my way, though.
Bit of behind the news, and then doing a project, and then doing another session where we might have made something out of metal, that kind of thing. It felt like it was all those things going together. It took me back to I guess it would be childhood, like sort of latter primary school. One
of our neighbours says he's descended from the Kelly gang. You get a lot of that.
Nothing to be proud of.
Well,
No. Oh, sorry, I forgot this. Small footnote. In 2012 or 2013, the remains of Ned Kelly, which had been identified, were repatriated to the family and buried in, was it Greta or, can't remember, somewhere up there where the family are. And 300 people showed up and they cried and they cheered. The Kelly family, the descendants of the Kelly gang and Ned Kelly himself have said that, ironically, when you say that people are sitting around going, oh, I'm descended from the Ned Kelly, like it's something to be proud of, they've actually copped a lot of shit over the generations for being the sons of a criminal. Really? And their view is, well, they don't think he's a criminal. They don't think he's a hero. You know, I think what they're saying is it's just of his time and it's just the way it was. But I found it really interesting that I think they dug up the remains when Pentridge was closed and the old Melbourne jail. So when the old Melbourne jail got redone, they dug up all these, unmarked
People who'd
graves.
been-
Yeah.
yeah.
And for a long time, there was a skull running around, which people said was Ned Kelly's skull. But thanks to DNA testing, it's not actually. In the remains, and that was the other thing, after he was executed, there was a rumor that he'd been given to medical students to dissect, and it was always denied. When they actually did dig up these remains and they identified them as belonging to Ned Kelly, there wasn't much of the head, the skull, remaining except from some occipital bone or something, but it did show indications that it had been dissected.
Oh.
But that's all the macabre stuff that people really get into after the fact. And I think it's terrible to desecrate a corpse, whether the person has committed murder or not. And the main reason that they moved him
Unless
was because,
in the name of science.
well, he didn't, also with your consent, right? If he didn't give consent, but his last wishes, part of his last wishes was to be buried in consecrated ground, and he hadn't been buried on consecrated ground up until that 2012, 2013, when they actually repatriated his remains.
Do you get to dictate that when you're a criminal?
I know, right? And also, you've committed a mortal sin. You've murdered 3 people, and you've probably had something in like Aaron Sherritt's death. You definitely had a hand in that, right? Whether you didn't pull the trigger or not, you knew about that happening. So, and then other people got killed in the crossfire, and you call yourself a Catholic. I think he thought himself as like some kind of a soldier at this point. Nah, I'm not all right with it.
You haven't come around to this,
No.
the other side. No,
No.
I don't think so either. I think they're just feral.
I mean, it might be that I told the story in such a way as to bias your position, but honestly, no, I
don't think
didn't.
so.
I really didn't.
I don't think so.
I
don't
really
think
didn't.
so.
I just
I think they're trying
Yeah.
to take into account how people were treated and of the time and all the rest. It's always a little bit challenging to look through that lens because it's not pleasant to do so. But I don't think is it sort of the means justify the ends. I think.
Well, I mean, they had moments where he talks in in the Cameron letter about how the police show up and they're that standard kind of police brutality. They're smashing up all their provisions. They're getting the flour on the ground and they're ruining everything and they're threatening the girls. That they're going to shoot him and they're just his mother's got an infant baby and it's just terrible because you're picking on women and children kind of thing.
But you're bringing it to their door as well. That often comes out. Right?
280 horses.
Yes, I see this often come up.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, there are women and children here. It's like, yes, but
the innocent victims. My innocent brother, who wasn't innocent.
You see that in modern crimes.
She's
where
turning fucking sly grog and doing God knows what, smashing a policeman over the fucking head. Like seriously.
That's right. They're not all innocent, but I also think you're choosing to run these, operations, whatever it is, out of family homes and whatever else. You bring it to your doorstep as well.
100%.
Do you think Victorians have some kind of because it's a Victorian story? Do you think you have some kind of, or not so much a greater interest, but do you think people there would be more inclined to think that he's a hero or care? I'm not sure that people care around the rest of the states quite so much.
Ned Kelly, yeah, probably.
And then also because of the families and the people that would come from that, in terms of, relatives and all the rest must be lots of people who can claim to have had somebody who is somehow involved at some point.
Not I. I come from a good
no, not you.
Adelaide stock.
And downtown Pest.
Downtown Pest. Some people would like to claim it, I'm sure, and bully for you.
Yeah.
But I think, yes, it's probably Victorian. Bushranging was happening, though, in New South Wales as well. But this is just one of the most famous.
Of course. This is the one,
well,
right?
Hare, what was the other 2 guys? Hare and someone. They were pretty bad too. And they had previously had, interestingly enough, the Kelly Gang is one of the last bushranger groups to happen. So they're like at the end of an era, right? Probably because there was a massive crackdown on all this shit after this because the police were like, we're not having any of that. And there did seem to be some kind of, as a result of that inquiry into the police's behaviour, there was a bit of almost a ceasefire that took place. So once Ellen Kelly got out of jail, because she goes to jail, right? The Fitzgerald, the guy who got shot in the arm, allegedly, that happens. Then it's like bang, bang, bang. She's still in jail the whole period of time pretty much for her part in smacking him over the head, etc., attempted murder, till Ned's in jail himself and then gets hung. So I think she was still in jail when she saw him. She was allowed to go and visit him to say goodbye before he was executed. So it's a very short period of time when you think about it, how quickly it escalates.
Yeah.
And I think what happened after she gets out of jail, she negotiates a kind of peace with the police. They won't hassle them as much about X, Y, and Z, and we won't be so naughty on those things. And it did seem to settle the tensions post Ned's execution.
Yeah, I don't suppose they want situations where there are entire towns being held hostage and
67 people
pubs
having a
being burned
party.
to the
I mean,
ground. I
fucking hell,
know.
could you imagine it? The imagery, I've never bothered to watch any of the films. Tony said that if I tried to do an Irish accent, as long as I didn't do as bad as Mick Jagger when he portrayed
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
he
Yeah.
portrayed Ned Kelly, then I'm probably doing all right. And I really steered away from it because I always slip into Scottish when I do it. To be sure. I have to keep reminding myself. Yeah, and then you've got the obviously the Heath Ledger version, and there are lots of other, well, there are
I didn't remember that. I'll have to have a
multiple
look.
versions of it. I've not watched any of them because I just, honestly, I don't, it's like the Bonnie and Clyde stuff or Billy the Kid. I don't want to kind of delve into stories of people who are effectively criminals who have been
Oh, yeah.
glorified and celebritized.
I certainly
later.
think seeing Orlando Bloom and Heath Ledger
I know, right?
as Ned Kelly and Joe Byrne may.
Having said that, I've seen the photos of both Ned Kelly and Joe, but they were strapping young men.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were quite attractive.
Which always helps.
Not Lonergan, though. Thomas Lonergan. Not a looker. Anyway, he was the meanest man I ever came across. I don't know. I just sort of did some weird American thing.
Interesting.
Clarky.
Oh, there's one. I'll just read the headline for The Guardian. It says from Mick Jagger to Heath Ledger, Australia's bungled ... I'm not sure what the rest of it said, but I'm pretty sure it'll be bungled way of dramatising Ned Kelly would be my guess and what it goes on to say.
I don't think they've ever done a good version of it.
No.
Yeah, Mick Jagger to Heath Ledger, Australia's bungled quest to make a great Ned Kelly film.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
God.
That was back from 2017.
Maybe that's what I should do, is write the screenplay of it. Except I'd have quotes like, "Oh, shit, sorry, mate. I didn't mean to shoot you. I meant to get some other constable."
Shit gun.
Oh, shit, mate. Soz. Wrong person, wrong time. Soz about that. Anyway, Clarky, thoughts?
Oh, look, I think there's a whole lot of romance about the Ned Kelly story. And I do think if you had have done a lot of cultural context of what was going on at the time, there was an awful lot of corruption, but of mistreatment. That the whole concept of building colonies of people who had stolen loaves of bread and transported them to the other side of the world,
Recipe for disaster.
them, the way they were all treated, they needed someone to stand up for them. And I think that Ned Kelly is one of the people who represented that. And I think that's, whilst his actions may not seem good, particularly in today's context, I think you need that sometimes. And
yeah, but I think there are other people at the time who were still trying to stand up for people who weren't murdering people.
Oh, there would have been heaps, but at some point, at what point do you go from saying that's not very nice to taking action, and how far does that action go, and over a long period of time? Like, you talk about all of the things that the story is all of the things that he did wrong, but things like the government didn't allow the Indigenous trackers to have their 50 quid. There's a whole lot of...
At the time, they didn't consider them to be equal citizens.
Was the thing, not just from the Indigenous. If you were on the
Chinese
Irish side
and the Irish,
or the criminal side of the colonies,
correct,
you were treated terribly.
Absolute shit.
I think, I think it's very much of its time, but I'm not as anti the whole thing as what you are, because I do think that
I just think it's gross.
Someone's got to stand up, and there was heaps of stuff that was done wrong on the other side as well that people don't go to jail for. They don't end up,
It's more the institutionalized stuff.
Right?
Yeah.
We're the ones doing good. We're the...
Well, there was genocide happening at exactly the same period.
Anyway, so yeah, I'm fine with it. And Swanee, I think to your point about the Victorians, does it stay more in our psyche? 100% it does, because you go to Glenrowan and there's signs about it. You go to Beechworth, there's signs about it. There's a tourist route around Victoria where you can go and see all the different... I feel like it's
such a Victorian experience.
It is. And that's what annoys me, right? Because the guy who's always trying to get people to go to Ilden, there's somewhere there where they camped for 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, fuck off. Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
I took a shit behind that tree. Do you want to make that a tourist route? It's not my thing. All right, so you're quite happy that we just ended up where we ended up with that? No sentencing? I mean, it was, when you think about it from a cultural context, there's a whole lot of bad going on.
Yeah.
So maybe we just leave
it
as
tread lightly.
Let's try not to do that again.
Correct.
Is the PSA there. Let's learn from that.
That's what's interesting. At least we can look at it now and see it for the fact that it was just an absolute shit show, because there was so much wrong with how society was being set up, like how they were creating a society and what it was based on. So, if anything good came from that, well, then that's a good thing.
Well, came the same bullshit class system that Britain was under, yeah. All right, well, thanks for taking a rollicking ride through Victoria's history.
Through Victoria? Fuck, I feel like we've been on trains, buses, I mean, everywhere. It was like, we're on a horse to where? It's going to take how long? It's 36 k's, and it's up the Hume Highway. And I was like, I've had, talk about a bit of map work. I've had the maps out there, radio, okay. I was getting very close to Wang and up near you guys. It's like, it's really in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, it went
literally down the end of our street.
Bridge up to Eldon, Barnawartha, Chiltern, Wangaratta.
Yeah.
Beechworth. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere.
Oh, my God. I feel like we've been on the Ned Kelly Express or the Kelly Gang Express, probably.
All right. Well, thanks for joining. And as we say every week, miss you already.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks for listening to Trial by Wine. You can contact us at trialbywine@gmail.com. Please rate, review and subscribe to Trial by Wine on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at www.patreon.com, Trial by Wine, or visit our website www.trialbywine.com to donate to us. Your support will help us cover many more cases and apply wacky sentences. We really appreciate you listening and hope you tell everyone about us. Our cover art is by John Christo and music is by Beauchamp from pixabay.com.